Hello, I hope everyone is well. I made a separate video explaining the dystopian world of Brave New World without any spoilers, and I put the link in the description. But today I'm going to analyze the plot and characters in this video. I'd like to start with Bernard, the main character of our story, and he's an alpha citizen, which means that he has a pretty high social class. But despite his high social status, for some reason he is physically smaller than other alphas. This is a huge deal and gives Bernard an inferiority complex because physical appearance and size is one of the things that are determined based on your caste. For example, lower caste citizens get their growth stunted by adding alcohol when they're being fertilized. And Bernard lacks a sense of belonging, and consequently, he recognizes the flaws of his society because he's always left alone, in a society where community is really emphasized. He doesn't take the soma drug that makes him happy, and he wants to be in one deep relationship rather than being in multiple light ones like the government encourages. Bernard is an individual amongst a community that lacks individuality. So you can see how he's like so alone. It was really interesting to contrast Bernard to Lenina because although Bernard is very, very troubled, in some aspects his mind seemed much healthier than others because he knows he can confront his own emotions and he's also capable of thinking and making observations. But on the other hand, Lenina, she doesn't understand why Bernard does this, and she actually finds it concerning. So whenever she has problems, she just she always resorts to her beloved Soma. Now let's move on to John, also known as the Savage. John is the son of Linda and the director. As it's considered a crime to biologically have a child, Linda and John live in a savage reservation in New Mexico, and they are outsiders there because they are from the world state. And they would be outsiders if they returned to the world state as well because of the whole getting pregnant thing. I found it refreshing though that they had land in this book that wasn't this civilized world state culture, but at the same time, the savage reservation was very, very different from the majority of the world today. It was a land that had no technological advancements whatsoever. It was good that John was in the story. He was really essential to driving this whole plot and the whole themes and stuff because without him, then there wouldn't have been that debate between John and the controller where John asks all the questions and handles all the arguments that we readers had about the world state. I couldn't have put those rebuttals better myself. And even though some characters like Bernard thought differently than the majority, those arguments that John gave were only arguments that someone who lived in both the world state and the savage reservation could have given. No matter how revolutionary Bernard's thoughts were, it just wouldn't have been possible unless it was someone like John who had lived in both worlds. There was one really heartbreaking scene where Linda, who is John's mum, slaps her son in anger because she's like, "Oh, you're the reason why I have to live in the savage reservation. It's all your fault. If I hadn't gotten pregnant, then I would have lived a perfect life." And then after using violence, she realizes what she's done and she feels awful about it and she starts hugging John and stuff to compensate for her violence. And I found this scene heartbreaking, but at the same time, I couldn't really criticize Linda for being a bad mum. I mean, she was a bad mum, there's no denying that, but she never had a mum herself. She never had a parent figure. And where she grew up, there wasn't even parents weren't even a thing, they didn't exist. So of course it was kind of natural for her to not know what a mother should do and what kind of love a parent should give to a child. So I found that really heartbreaking, because, I felt bad for Linda, and then I was angry at her for treating John like that, and then I felt sad for John, and it was just a lot of emotions. But on a not so brighter note, I thought it was hilarious how reporters called John Mr. Savage in an attempt to be formal and polite. It was such a juxtaposition because slapping Mr. in front of Savage doesn't make it any more courteous or respectful at all. And also, I found John's initial infatuation towards Lena to be a tad silly. I felt that his whole love at first sight thing towards Lena was influenced heavily by Romeo and Juliet, which was a play that he loved to read. He was just so infatuated with Lena before she had even spoken a word to him directly. Anyways, speaking of Romeo and Juliet, the author mentions and quotes several books. Of course, Huxley must have loved books, since he's a writer, but I couldn't help but think that his constant incorporation of them was more than just because of his love for reading. In the book, John says that books contain magical words, and it made me think that books were the history of true civilization. And with Huxley, like adding the whole books are like old books that we read today are banned from the world state. It just really made me think that he was trying to express a civilization, that civilization was one where, like, true civilization was one where people love, hurt, feel, and express. The ending of this story was very, very depressing, with John unaliving himself. At the end, Mond recognizes that John genuinely wants truth and the suffering that comes along with it. And Mond offers him to put him in the lighthouse instead of the island, like the other people who are punished. Mond was okay with having pain and meaning of life as long as it was outside of his system. And in this case, that whole outside of the system part was the faraway lighthouse or island. John tries to live a life cleansed from the world state, but he fails. And this ending really reflected the book's theme, which was incompatibility of happiness and truth. If you live in the world state, you'll be shielded from the truth, but you'll kind of be happy. And if you live away from the world state, then you would not be guaranteed happiness. The ending of this book did a great job making its point, but I wish that it had been different. So instead of punishing himself, perhaps John could have tried to make a change as a form of atonement. Because atonement can come in many different forms, and although one of them is self-punishment, the other one is just making a positive change in the world and just fixing everything. And I can't imagine anyone else but John in this story who's capable of doing that, because he's like the only one with who can think differently. And Bernard can't do it because even though he can think differently, he's a coward. But John isn't. So he's like the only person who could do it. And now who knows what's going to happen to Brave New World. There's no more John. There's no more different thinkers. One question I had about this book was how it was maintained, which is quite ironic because the whole world in this book is centered around stability. But after the big bosses die, then they'll need to put a next leader in charge, and that leader has to be someone who is programmed enough to invariably follow the rules, but also is not too programmed to the point where they act like a puppet. They need to be submissive enough to understand the current system, but still capable of handling exposure to forbidden things like the Bible. At the same time, they should be unremorseful and feel no guilt even after knowing all of this society's secrets and past. And other than its current leaders, the book didn't, mention anyone who fitted this description. Maybe Bernard? No, not Bernard, because he'd feel redemption, hopefully. And also, he's in bad terms with the current leaders, so that's definitely not going to happen. Thank you for listening to my analysis today. If you have anything else you want to add to my analysis, then please feel free to do so in the comment section. But until then, stay healthy and read loads, and I'll be back with my next book-related video. So stay tuned.